Rogue Ranger by Melinda Kusira. Robin of Larkspur number 3. Acknowledgements. Thank you to all our supporters on Patreon and Substack, especially Glenda Andre. Without your generous support, this book might not have happened. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. If you would like to support the characters who entertain you and get access to our books before anyone else, along with whatever else Rand dreams up, head over to Patreon or Substack to join us. About Rogue Ranger. A mother's love knows no bounds, but the enchanted forest is unforgiving. There are 3 rules she can't break: start no fires, carry no weapons, and do no harm or die. Robin must save her daughter while keeping the rules of the forest, despite being harried by shapeshifters who want something from her. With the help of a powerful mage and his enigmatic companion, they face tests that push them to the brink. But one of them is not who they seem. Will they triumph over the forest's rules and the evil that seeks to destroy them, or succumb to its power and turn against each other? Dive into this epic fantasy adventure and find out. Author's note. I know it's annoying for characters to remain nameless or not give their names, but the characters in this book live in an enchanted forest. So they're well versed in magic and the power of names. They won't tell people their names unless they trust them. If you were in the enchanted forest and you encountered a stranger, would you give them your name? I don't think you would, because you don't know if the person has any magic, or if they'd use that knowledge against you. So there will be characters in this book that won't tell anyone their names for that reason. I just wanted to add this note because this drives my editor crazy. But I can't imagine anyone who grew up in an enchanted forest would ever give out their name when they met a total stranger. I hope this helps. It's annoying not knowing everyone's names, but the characters in this book will just have to gain their trust to get their names. I hope you enjoy this story. It was an uphill battle from page 1 with Robin, and that's why it took so long for this book to come out after her second one. Betrayed. Midnight tomorrow. Snow crunched under her boots, but it was the only sound since the wind had calmed down to a breeze that stirred the bare branches overhead. Robin rounded yet another giant tree in the enchanted forest and stopped when undisturbed snow stretched on before her. Shade. Where are you? And where was Sarn? I never should have let Shade carry him. I should have made a sled and dragged him behind me. But time was her enemy, and Shade had picked up the lean mage like he weighed nothing at all after Sarn blacked out from too much magicking. As much as it galled her to admit it, she couldn't have done that. I'm where I should be, beside my angel. Shade's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, and it gave the word angel special emphasis. Sarn was handsome and powerful and his eyes glowed, but that wasn't why Shade called him an angel. There was something about Sarn that made her want to wrap him in wool and stuff him into a vault where he'd be safe. I need to stop thinking about him like he's a precious jewel that I need to guard. Robin cursed. He doesn't belong to you. Sarn promised to help me find my daughter. She pivoted but couldn't spot Shade, even after baiting them. Where did Shade take Sarn? That enigma couldn't hide him for long. Sarn had a lot of magic, and green light leaked out of his eyes even when he closed them, but there was no green glow above her. Sarn must be here somewhere. I must find him. He could freeze to death, since mages were just as susceptible to the cold as everyone else. Robin doubted Shade was doing anything to prevent that. I wish Sarn wasn't so damned attractive. He was complicating what should be a straightforward rescue mission. Worse still, that mage reminded Robin of her father. And that should have iced her attraction, but it just made her want to throw him over her shoulder like a spoil of war and carry him off. I could earn a good living with a mage on my arm. Robin tucked that thought away for later. After all, she still needed to earn a living after she saved her daughter. Magic might be illegal in the cities, but everywhere else in this country, people coveted it. You don't deserve his help. I tried to stop him from volunteering, but my angel has a big heart. Shade's voice definitely came from above. How could Shade climb a tree while carrying Sarn when the lowest branches were hundreds of feet above their heads? Who was Shade? But you failed, and he promised me. Robin circled the tree where Shade's voice came from. If there was a gray blob perched in its branches, she couldn't tell in the dark. Shade's clothing blended too well with the night. Just to be safe, she unslung her bowcase and quietly unlatched it. Part of her mind was already calculating the speed and direction of the breeze stirring the cold, damp air. Sarn's warning about the forest echoed in her mind.
Remember their 3 rules. Start no fires. Carry no weapons. Do no harm.
Robin closed the latches on her bowcase. I won't risk it. She couldn't anger the forest, not when she didn't know where Sarn was. The trees could harm him by accident since they covered the land so thickly here. I know, but I'm correcting that mistake, Shade said, and their voice came from everywhere again, pulling her out of her scattered thoughts. Oh really? How's that going for you? Robin gripped her bowcase. She could still swing it if Shade came at her. How will I fight the wild hunt to get my daughter back when the forest doesn't allow any violence under their boughs? A wolf howled, but she couldn't tell how far away it was. Where were those change wolves? She hadn't seen them since Sarn had started magicking, but he stopped shielding them when he passed out. Nothing stopped those wolves from attacking now. Robin glanced around. Where are those wolves? Something whizzed past her ear. What was that? Robin found an arrow buried point first in the snow, and the tree next to it shifted like a dreamer. Where did that arrow come from? Shade didn't bring anything with them when they left Mount Eredrin. Where could that arrow come from? Did a ranger try to shoot her? I never got a look at the arrows the rangers of Mount Eredrin favor, so I don't know if this is one of theirs. Robin stayed low in case a second arrow followed the first. Where are you, Shade? Robin didn't see or hear them moving about anymore. A flash of movement made her turn. Did she just see a green glow over there? Robin waited, but it didn't appear again. A shadow rushed out of the darkness to her left and leapt at her. Robin threw her arm up to cover her head, and the wolf collided with it in a brilliant green flash that sent it flying into the darkness. A thread darkened and disintegrated as it fell from her wrist, but there was a dark thread lying on the ground near her foot. At last a lead. Robin crouched to examine it. The last time Shade had used their strange powers, they'd left behind black threads just like the one squirming away from her in the snow. Are you returning to your master? Robin extended her gloved hand toward it, and it crawled away from her. What power do you hold? Was it enough to disappear like Shade did? What are you doing? Shade appeared next to her, but their arms were empty. Where's Sarn? Robin let her hand hover over the dark thread, inching toward Shade. Somewhere safe. Shade raised their hands. Can I believe that? Probably not, but Robin retracted her hand. The dark thread had merged with Shade's boot. He'd better be. I promised to watch out for him. No need. I won't let anyone harm him. Shade stuffed their hands into their pockets, and that should have made them less unnerving, not more so. Does that include you? Just the thought of someone trying to hurt Sarn made her blood boil. I need to calm down. I don't own him. But damn it, Robin wanted to. She'd never met anyone like him before, and gold coins kept dancing at the edge of her vision every time she thought of him, and what people would pay for one of his spells. When did I become this mercenary? Robin tried to put all thoughts of the mage out of her mind. Are you sure about that? I see it in your eyes. You want him for his magic. You're like everyone else. You don't see his true worth. Shade pointed an accusatory finger at her. And you do? I've seen the way you look at him. You covet his magic too. Would you protect him even from yourself? Robin blinked when a snowflake landed in her eyes. When she opened them, Shade had vanished again. Where did they go this time? Shade? No answer. Why should they speak to her? Another arrow shot through the darkness. This time it struck the ground inches from her boot, and the tree next to her shook, raining snow on her. Robin was on her own. Shade didn't care if she survived this encounter. At least I know where I stand. Robin touched the latches on her bow case, then stopped. The forest hadn't reacted when she'd used the magic threads to shove the wolf away. But it had reacted to the arrows. Maybe she should leave her bow in its case for now. Besides, the arrow hadn't hit her. Was it a warning shot? Where are you? Robin scanned the darkness beneath the boughs. He's mine, Shade said from behind her. Pain crashed into her head when she turned. Shade dropped something hard. It was probably a rock. Shiari had too many lying around. Robin collapsed on the snow as more snow fell on her. Above her head, branches rustled and swayed like dreamers stretching after a long nap, but they didn't stab the earth in search of Shade to punish them for breaking their rules. Why did you hit me? We had an agreement. No, you had one with my angel, but your quest hurts him and I can't allow that. He's precious to me. Ice-covered snow crunched nearby as Shade strode away. His son is missing too. Robin shouldn't have needed to point that out, not to Shade since they claimed they cared about Sarn. Darkness hovered in her peripheral vision. She blinked to clear her winnowing sight, but that didn't help. Is the boy his? She played so many games. I don't believe the boy is his. I hope you find your daughter. It's better if you find her without my angel. He won't fight, and you'll have to fight to get her back. What about his son? Robin fought the darkness overtaking her. She must stay conscious. This might be the most important conversation in her life. Yes, it's better if you go after your daughter alone. My angel gave you a direction, Shade said, then silence blanketed the forest again as their footsteps faded. The enchanted trees would get him. She just needed to wait. Where was the archer? Robin listened but heard nothing, not even the wind stirred the bare branches above. As the pain swept her into that starless darkness, she thought she heard the crunch of boots on snow and the creak of branches as they stabbed downward. I hope they kill Shade for breaking their rules. Someone was coming. Was Shade returning to finish her off? Doubts enter in. Now, yesterday afternoon. I'm coming, Rosalie. Hang on for a little longer. Robin tugged her scarf up as she hurried down the switchback trail. She couldn't get away from Mount Eredrin fast enough, not with the icy patches causing her to slide for several man-lengths before she caught herself on a boulder. Thank God she had, because it was a long way down to the snow-covered meadow. I need to be more careful. Rosalie's counting on me to save her. But was she really? Doubts gnawed at her. Rosalie was only a few months old. She knows I'm her mother. Was her daughter still alive? Robin pushed off the boulder and trudged onward. She must be. I'm a fighter and she's my daughter, so she must be too. Robin wouldn't accept anything else, not when she'd finally found someone who could track her daughter's kidnappers. But what if she isn't alive? That doubting voice in her head asked. Your daughter might not turn out like you. That was true. Robin stabbed her bowcase into the snow-covered gravel path and shoved that doubt aside. Rosalie was so young. It was too early to tell what kind of woman she'd become. And I'll love her no matter what she wants to do with her life, just like my mother loves me. Robin paused as pain stabbed her chest at the thought of her mother. They'd quarreled before she'd left home, and everything her mother had predicted had come true. You were right, Mom. I hope I can tell you that one day. Robin brushed the tears from her eyes onto her gloved hand and turned to check on her back trail. A cloaked man with glowing green eyes trudged through the blowing snow behind her, but he wasn't catching up. What was Sarn doing? He promised to help her, but he couldn't do that if he didn't leave the mountain. Sarn glanced behind him as he slowed. Was he regretting his decision already? For a long moment he stared at the giant yellow glowing doors. An ancient race of stone mages had set them on a mountainside. Beyond them, a maze of tunnels led eventually to the city under the mountain. At least that was the rumor. Robin hadn't seen it, so she didn't know if that was true. What was he waiting for? Before Robin could ask, the wind struck her hard enough to blow her off the trail. She grabbed for the nearest rock formation and held on until it subsided. Further up the trail, Sarn stood there waiting for something. His cloak billowed in the wind like a dark green banner, but he remained as still as the mountain, no doubt thanks to his magic. What else could he do with it? I should have asked. But getting him out of Mount Eredrin before he or his ranger masters changed their minds had been more important. Besides, he wasn't the only one who had magic. I have it too, according to that golem, but mine doesn't stop the wind from knocking me down. Envy welled up inside her, but Robin tamped it down. Stress brought out the worst in her when she needed to be at her best. I still don't know even a fraction of what I can do with that power. Right now it just wrapped around her wrist in glowing coils like some kind of exotic jewelry, but it might have other benefits. Robin let go of the rock. Sarn still hadn't moved, and no one else had left the mountain stronghold. But someone would. The rangers couldn't let someone as powerful as Sarn out of their sight for long. I promised I'd return him, but they don't trust me, even though I'm a ranger too. And that hurt. The metal medallion around her neck that identified her as a ranger felt like a block of ice against her skin, but she wouldn't take it off. Not for all the gold in Shiari. It was a gift from her father, but she'd earned it through archery contests and interminable drills. Is it because I'm a woman that they don't see me as one of them? That didn't make sense since the rangers of Mount Eredrin had at least one female ranger. Robin had met her. Or do they distrust me because I'm a stranger? That was possible. Mount Eredrin was on the river near Thal, and it received a lot more visitors than her home village of Larkspur. Perhaps they've had troublemakers in the past who claimed to be rangers. That was possible. Why am I driving myself crazy over this? I'm just borrowing Sarn for a few days to rescue my daughter. I'll return him and go my own way when Rosalie is strong enough to travel. There was still the question of what she'd do after that, but Robin put that aside too. Sarn finally turned and trudged after her. Robin stamped her feet and prayed for patience. Oh, come on. You're a lot taller than me. Put those long legs to good use. You should have passed me already. But Sarn didn't. He stayed as far behind as he could get without walking backward. Why was he dawdling? Couldn't he walk faster? Robin opened her mouth to ask, then shut it as she remembered the golem under the mountain. It promised to let him go. Had it reneged on that deal? Robin studied the tall, lean mage. Were his eyes glowing brighter than before? Maybe he shuffled because something was physically or magically holding him back. Would the mountain let Sarn leave? It must. He promised to help me. Robin hurried to the end of the trail so it couldn't impede her too. She didn't stop until she set both feet on the snowy meadow. A gray shape appeared behind Sarn. Before she could call out a warning, Sarn turned and stopped dead in his tracks. Great. Another delay. Just what she didn't need right now. Robin scrubbed a gloved hand over her face. When she lowered it, she wanted to scream in frustration. Sarn stood on the side of the mountain and talked to the person in gray robes. She couldn't recall any religious orders that wore gray, but she didn't know much about the orders that weren't close to her home village. Who's that? Robin squinted at the person as they flanked Sarn and accompanied him down the mountain trail. Was that person Nolo's insurance? Possibly. Why else would a stranger head out into a storm? You'd better not slow us down or we'll leave you behind. Robin shoved a tendril of hair that had escaped her braid under her hood and stamped her feet, partly to warm them, and partly to release some of her pent-up frustration. Sarn was taking a long time to hike down to the meadow, and it was that gray-clad enigma's fault. Who was that gray person to Sarn? She squelched the suspicions caroming around inside her mind. I need to get a grip on my emotions, or I'll never save my daughter. Some rest would repair her temper, but she couldn't stop now, not when she finally had a mage who could help her find Rosalie. That was all that mattered now. Robin rubbed the bridge of her nose. I need to stop jumping to conclusions. Robin stamped her feet harder than necessary and faced the mountain. The wind whipped past her, pelting her back with snow. It grabbed Sarn's dark green cloak and billowed it again, but it didn't touch the long gray robes or the gray veil covering the enigma hiking beside him. How strange. Was Sarn's mysterious companion a mage too? Mount Eredrin was a large settlement. Could it boast 2 mages without drawing the eyes of the seekers of truth? I doubt it. Mount Eredrin was too close to Jacora, where most of the magic haters lived. It was just a boat ride away from that city. Who are you? Will you tell me if I ask? If not, she could make them. Robin ground the metal cap of her bow case into the snow as she considered that. It was a great idea. I need to know as much about my travel companions as I can. That knowledge could save her life or her daughter's. A wolf howled off in the distance, reminding her that Wolfpack was still out there. Would Sarn fight if those change wolves attacked them? Based on their interaction so far, she didn't know what he'd do. I'll fight like hell until my enemy lies at my feet. Robin turned her bow case, and its metal cap bored into the snow at her feet. What about that person in gray? Would they fight?
What did you say?
Sarn stepped off the path and trudged over to her, but she didn't say anything aloud. His green eyes glowed bright enough to light his face under his hood, but nothing happened as he walked away from the mountain. No golem appeared, and the mountain didn't extrude stone arms to drag him back inside. It didn't shake, collapse, explode, or do any of the things the golem had warned about. Perhaps it would let Sarn leave with her. Who's your friend? Robin tried not to look like she held her bow case like a staff, but she did.
They're called Shade and they're coming with us.
Sarn didn't introduce her. That was strange, but maybe he'd already told Shade who she was and what she wanted. What else did you tell them about me? Robin didn't ask that aloud. The question sounded too much like an accusation in her head, so it would stay there for now. Besides, she didn't want to start their quest with distrust, but she needed some information about Shade.
Do you know which way to go?
Sarn waved to the circle of standing stones that surrounded the meadow and mountain. The enchanted forest crouched beyond it on 3 sides. No, that's why I need help. Didn't he remember that? Robin had told him that was her problem before they'd left. She adjusted her pack instead of asking. Arrows extruded from both sides of the closed flap on her pack since she'd shoved her quiver in last. It would be awkward to draw them on the run, but she probably wouldn't need any arrows right away. If she did, she'd just drop her pack and grab them. At least that way the arrows wouldn't fall out.
Right. You said that. I'm sorry. I have a lot on my mind.
Sarn knelt in the snow and closed his eyes. He wore a pack too, but it only contained water, food, and the contraption she'd rigged for carrying a baby. Was he even armed? Probably not. There were no bulges in his pockets, not even for Lumiere crystals, but he didn't need one to light his way since his eyes glowed brightly enough to do the job. So why did he have a glowing pendant hanging around his neck? Sarn was a puzzle and a pleasant place to rest the eyes when he wasn't causing yet another delay. I need to calm down. His son is missing too. Robin should have cut him some slack, but doubt slid into her mind as silently as shadows on the snow. Did he really have a son? She'd seen no proof, just that farce with the busty teenager who looked at Sarn like he was a steak she wanted to devour. I didn't ask for any proof either. Maybe I should ask for that now. What are you doing? Shade stopped beside Sarn. Damn, that enigma had asked a good question.
I'm finding our children the only way I know how.
Sarn pulled off his gloves and shoved his hands into the snow and his eyes unfocused. His magic turned everything green as it shot through the earth like a searching beam. Now's my chance. Robin waited for his breathing to slow as the mage fell deeper into the spell he wove. With luck, he wouldn't emerge from his trance until she'd gotten a few answers from his friend. Shade's a strange name, but it's fitting for one so muffled in gray garments. They hide everything except your eyes. And the eyes were the windows of the soul. Robin swung her bow case, but it swept through the air when Shade vanished, leaving a black thread behind. Where did they go? Robin spun on her heel and twirled her bow case like a staff as she scanned the snow for footprints, but there were none except hers. Sarn's prints stopped where he knelt in the snow, and so did Shade's. Where are you? Show yourself. What do you want? Shade asked, and their voice came from everywhere, like an echo in a mountain pass. But Shade stayed out of sight. How could they do that? What magic did Shade possess? There was only one way to find out.
Shadows of the past. 10 minutes ago. Sarn stepped outside and the wind tried to cut through his garments, but he ignored that as he stared at the cliff in front of him and didn't see Shade. Only Robin's footprints disturbed the snow as she hiked on ahead. "Where are you, Shade? You said you'd help me." But that was a lie like so many others he'd heard over the years. Sarn had hoped their friendship would prove stronger than the addiction pulling his friend away from him, but it hadn't. Sarn rubbed his chest with the heel of his gloved hand, but that didn't ease the pain stabbing his heart at yet another betrayal. "I can't turn back. I must go on without Shade." His son was counting on him. Sarn turned into the wind whipping across the cliff, and it struck his face like a cold slap as Robin's voice echoed in his mind.
"You can follow us,"
Robin had said to Nolo.
"We need trained fighters, and he's not one."
Robin had meant him. Sarn glanced at the cloudy sky, and a snowflake sizzled when it struck his glowing green eyes. "I'm not a coward. I just don't like to fight. There's enough pain in this world. I won't add to it." So what if he didn't have a warrior's spirit? A warrior can't shield people, but I can. Green light wreathed his gloved hands until he banished it. What good was all this magic when he couldn't even save his friend? A tear rolled down his cheek. "Where are you, Shade?"
"We'll need skilled fighters. Let us be your advanced scouts,"
Robin had also said, but not to him. She'd already written him off as a liability by that point. "I'm not a liability. I can take care of myself." Sarn had raised his brother from the cradle, and Murren had turned out just fine. They couldn't have taken my son if I was there. But he wasn't because he was working for the Rangers then. Sarn stamped his feet. His head map was minimized right now. He was tempted to expand it and search for Shade's icon, but he didn't. "I'll give Shade a few more minutes." Surely Nolo would need longer than that to find and outfit some Rangers to follow them. What had Nolo said? Sarn replayed his last words and hoped he'd remembered them right. "You can scout, but you stay within a mile of a Ranger. Is that clear?" "Yes," Sarn had said, and the wind flung his answer into the snowy meadow below. But Nolo's words didn't settle on him like a gesh. Sarn waited as the wind buffeted him. "Does this mean I can go further than a mile from a Ranger?" Sarn hoped so. They needed skilled fighters. Robin was right, but he couldn't let the Rangers follow them too closely, or they'd see his son. "And I'll lose him before I get to know him. I can't let that happen. How do I get into these messes?" But he knew how. Words often abandoned him. When that happened, he let other people speak for him. Robin had wanted the Rangers to follow, and she might get her way. Sarn couldn't see her through the blowing snow anymore, but her icon, which was as red as her Brigandine, stayed in his peripheral vision, which meant she was somewhere on this trail winding down the mountainside. I should stop wool gathering and follow her. But he stood there waiting. I'll just give Shade another minute in case they had trouble exiting the mountain without anyone seeing them. Surely another minute wouldn't matter, and he badly needed allies on this quest who would help him conceal his son when he got the boy back. There was still the question of what he would do after that. Where was Rand's mother when the baby was taken? Did she know someone took the boy? Would any of the foundlings tell Baku he was risking his life to save their son? Sarn had so many questions, and they piled onto his shoulders like boulders weighing him down. There wasn't time to head down to the lower quarters and tell her what was happening. Moirena or Will might tell her. I hope Murren will be okay without me. It felt weird leaving his brother here, but the Rangers had needed proof that he would return, as if the promises he'd made weren't enough. He'd sworn not to leave the lands claimed by Lord Jorinth Nalshira. How far would that promise let him go? Sarn hadn't gone far since arriving here. I'll go as far as I can and hope my son isn't beyond the limit of that promise, because Lord Jorinth isn't here to rescind it. Nor would he ask where that man was, because there was no way to do that without explaining why he needed that promise removed. Baku said they'd take my son away if they knew about him. And he believed it. Why do I want to impress her? She lied and betrayed me. But she was Rand's mother, and he didn't want his son to grow up without a mother like he had. Would she even care? Of course she would. Sarn wasn't being fair. Baku wasn't a monster. She was as devoted to the foundlings and their care as he was to his brother, and now his son too. But not to you, reminded his conscience. Baku doesn't care about you. You're just the fool she seduced to get a son with your eyes. And that stung more than it should have. Maybe she doesn't, but Shade cares about me. So where was his friend? Not here. Shade wasn't coming. Sarn stopped staring at the switchback trail and trudged after Robin. He could barely see her as snow pelted him like thousands of tiny cold knives. Despite the slippery conditions, Robin hiked at a brisk pace, using her longbow case to stabilize her on the snow-covered gravel. Sarn hadn't thought to bring a walking stick, and he regretted it when the leg he'd broken less than 2 years ago ached from the cold. Shade appeared beside him as Sarn passed a boulder, and the trail wound around a hairpin turn. You came back. Sarn faced his friend and stared, unable to believe what his eyes were telling him. Ever dramatic, Shade dropped to one knee and laid a gloved fist over their heart. Friends to the end, remember? I'm always with you. But you left, and Sarn needed to sit down. This was one shock too many. He felt around behind him for that boulder he'd just passed. Shade caught his hand and guided him to it. Yes, that was the plan. I'd slip out at an opportune moment then link up with you out here. Shade gestured to the snowy switchback trail. You didn't think, oh Sarn, you know I'd never let you go alone on such an important errand. I know now, but I thought, it doesn't matter what I thought. You're here and I'm so glad you are. We'd better go. Sarn brushed a tear from his eyes. He wasn't crying. It was just the wind, drying his eyes and making them tear despite the relief swelling in his chest. His voice was thick with tears again, but no one had ever been there except Murren, and his brother was 6 years younger than him. He had to get control, but he almost broke down when Shade pulled him into a tight hug. Sarn hadn't realized how much he'd needed it, but his friend had known. Shade always knew what he needed. Better? Shade asked as they released him. Yes, I'm okay now thanks to you. Because friendship was an always thing, and Sarn should have known that. I should have trusted Shade. I will next time. But he hoped there wouldn't be a next time. Rand deserved a boring childhood. I'll give him that from now on. There will be no more adventures, not for him, and not for me either. We'll just live, and let the world go on as it wishes without us. But in his heart he doubted that would happen. He had too much magic, and it attracted trouble, no matter how much he tried to avoid it. Good. Do you know where we're going? Shade linked arms with him so they could fight the wind tearing past them together like friends should. Not yet, but I have an idea. That idea involved using magic, and his magic had already shown how much it hated the winter and the snow. I'll make it show me where to go. I won't accept anything else, and it'll have to do what I want. Sarn clenched his fists. He'd brute force it if necessary. Robin was the warrior, and she looked tough enough to take on the wild hunt by herself. If it came to a fight, she'd just need a shield. And I can cast that. Shade thumped his back. Good, I like ideas. Neither spoke again until they reached the bottom and stepped onto the frozen meadow. By that time Sarn couldn't feel his feet. He'd layered up everywhere except there, but it was too late to turn back now. If he went back inside, Nolo might detain him or accompany them. Both would be bad. He hoped his feet would warm up while they hiked. Where to now? Shade glanced around at the snow-covered meadow. Everywhere they looked was white except for the darkening sky. It was a bruised kind of purple.
How are you planning to track them?
Robin held a hand in front of her eyes to shield them from the wind. Sarn stayed quiet since the answer was obvious and squatted in the snow. Before removing his gloves he caught Shade's gaze, and his best friend nodded as those concerned eyes promised to pull him out if he fell too deeply into the magic's thrall. Shade squeezed his shoulder and Sarn relaxed a little. Delving into the magic was too easy, and it was easier still to get lost in it. Out here that could be deadly. Sarn squeezed his friend's hand then let go, and Shade released him and stepped back, ready as always to catch him if he fell. Sarn hoped his friend wouldn't need to this time. But large expenditures of magic often preceded blackouts. Sarn took a deep breath and plunged his hands deep into the snow till he found the sleeping earth beneath. His magic connected with the frozen ground and fanned out. Find my son, he told it. His map unfurled, and its viewpoint shifted as his magic raced away on its errand. That tiny light he'd seen in the storeroom reappeared. It twinkled at the edges of his contracting vision until a hard object collided with his chest and sent him sprawling in the snow. Before Sarn blacked out, he heard the hounds of the wild hunt baying in the distance. Have I been betrayed?
Allies no more. Robin trudged toward the black thread lying on the snow. Footsteps crunched behind her and she swung her bow case as she spun. Shade hadn't expected her to react that fast, and her bow case struck them low enough to sweep their legs out from under them. Who are you really? Robin stood over Shade and tapped their neck with the cold metal cap of her bow case when they didn't answer. That had no effect because Shade's neck was swayed in layers of gray cloth like the rest of them. I am the shadow that follows his light. Shade extended a hand toward Sarn, but the mage hadn't moved, and his magic still lit the snow surrounding him, turning it a bright green. He knelt maybe 10 paces away, oblivious to the scuffle. Maybe he really was working magic. That doesn't make sense. Why did you follow him? Robin tapped Shade's throat with the tip of her bow case again when they didn't speak. I go where my angel goes. Shade struggled to reach Sarn. Their eyes were so dark there was no separation between pupil and iris, and that darkness bled into their sclera. Something looked at her through those unsettling eyes, and a shiver ran up her spine. Who are you working for? Robin tried to look away, but those strange eyes held her captive. Danger, screamed a small voice in the back of her mind, but Robin ignored it. She'd seen stranger things as a ranger. Though at the moment, she couldn't think of anything to match the bizarre days so far. Answer me. What are you? She dreaded the answer. But I need to know. Robin recoiled from the face, laughing at her from behind Shade's eyes. It had horns and fangs. I'm the shadow that follows his light. Shade sat up. And the nightmare you fear. I could snuff out that light. Robin hefted her bow case and pointed its metal end at Sarn, making clear her unspoken threat. Of course she'd never do it, not while there was a chance he could do what he promised. Even if he couldn't, she wouldn't hurt him. She liked what she'd seen of him so far, but Shade didn't know that. Thoughts of his vow and her promises brought their precise wording back to her, and they tied them together. Robin fought a smile at the thought of being tied even temporarily to a good mage. "What are you?" she pressed when the silence had gone on too long. "I'm a shadow cast by one more radiant than I." Shade rose and brushed off the snow. When their gaze fell on Sarn, the darkness receded from them, returning their eyes to the same brown as every other Shayari who didn't possess any magic. A shiver traveled up Robin's spine that had nothing to do with the cold or the wind. What the hell did she get herself mixed up in? "I just want to save my daughter." How did that one mission become so damned complicated? That's what happens when I involve others. But what other choice did she have? Robin couldn't find her daughter without help, but so far, that help hadn't provided a location or even a direction. "Why did you follow us?" Robin already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear the truth from Shade. She needed to know if she could trust the person under all that gray cloth, and right now Robin didn't. Someone had to. Two alone against a foe you still haven't told us much about, those are bad odds. Even I know that. Shade shook their robe and sent snowflakes flying. They sparkled in the green glow of Sarn's magic. How long would he take to pick a direction? So Shade didn't know about her arrangement with Nolo, and Sarn hadn't told them. Well, she wouldn't spoil that secret either. Shade would be surprised when the cavalry showed up. "You don't have any other reason?" Shade looked away, but not before their gaze betrayed them. So there was a romantic angle, wonderful. Still, an extra body might be useful if she could trust Shade, and she doubted that after what she'd seen. It would be better if this next conversation didn't have a witness. Robin stood just close enough. She swung high this time and struck Shade in the head just hard enough to stun them. Something flashed in those fluttering eyes too quickly to identify, then Shade slumped down into unconsciousness. But the rapid eye movements suggested they wouldn't be out for long. "I'd better make this quick." Robin checked on Sarn again. He still hadn't moved. Snow dusted his shoulders and his hooded head as she approached, bow case in hand. It was time to find out why he was really helping her and if his son existed.
A boot planted itself on Sarn's chest when he woke and shoved him into the snow. The glow of his eyes glinted off the metal cap, and he glanced from the polished wood case to the woman holding it. She looked like a warrior out of legend, with snow caking her hood, and tendrils of brown hair slipping out of her braid and falling like brown corkscrews around her scowling, wind-chapped face.
"Why are you helping me? How do I know what you did before wasn't a show put on for my benefit? You could be working with the kidnappers for all I know."
Robin tapped the cold tip of her bow case against his throat like a threat. Would she crush his windpipe if she didn't like his answer? What did she want to hear? Sarn stared at her as the cold seeped into him, despite his cloak and all the layers he'd donned before leaving the mountain. All that came to mind was the truth, but he had no proof to back it up with, just his word, and that probably wouldn't satisfy her. It wasn't a show. Why did she think it was? "I don't work magic like that for no reason." Sarn could think of a lot of things that were more fun than that. Magic was a tool, and he could use some now. There was plenty of magic massed in his hands, enough to swat her bow case away, but that wouldn't earn her trust, and he needed that to rescue his son. "I can find Ran, but I might need her to help me get him away from the wild hunt." If that was who had grabbed his son. He'd reserve judgment about that until he found the boy. Right now Sarn needed to win her trust.
"Why did you volunteer to help me?"
Robin pushed down on her bow case and its tip pressed on his throat. "Because I want to help you." "Where's Shade?" Sarn tried to look for his friend, but he couldn't move his head. What a strange woman. Why threaten him now? He'd already promised to help. But people seldom made much sense to Sarn.
"Prove it."
Robin pressed down on his chest with her booted foot. "They took my son. You saw my brother. Just before you arrived, he came to tell me a guy with fur and horns kidnapped my son. I was about to go after him. When I heard your account, I knew the same people took your daughter." Sarn hoped that was enough to satisfy her because it was the truth. He had nothing else to offer her. He'd already volunteered his magic.
"Oh. I didn't know. Oh God, what have I done?"
Robin removed her boot from his chest and shifted her bow case so its tip rested on the snow. As she stepped back, her gloved hand rose to cover her face. "Where's Shade, my friend in gray?" Sarn sat up and tried not to fear the worst for his friend, but it was hard when she looked so aghast. Robin pointed, but Sarn had already spotted a gray shape on the snow, and he crawled to his friend's side. "Shade. Speak to me. I can't do this without you." Sarn hung his head. He didn't know what to do to help since his magic couldn't heal his friend. Please let Shade be all right. He didn't see any blood, but he wouldn't if she struck Shade on the head. All the damage might be internal. Shade coughed. "What silliness is this? Of course you can, but you won't have to." A familiar gloved hand pushed through the snow covering it and cupped his face. Sarn seized that hand, and his energy drained away as he wrestled his friend free of the heavy wet snow. Sarn ignored that draining sensation. He was just tired. After all, he'd only slept a few hours after that dunking before Murren showed up to tell him about his son. I thought I lost you. Never, I'll always be with you. Shade winced as they sat up. How badly are you hurt? Sarn scanned his friend but still didn't see any wounds. I'm not hurt. I'm just a little sore. There are rocks under the snow, and we didn't meet under ideal circumstances. Shade glared at Robin for that.
I'm sorry. It's just been one long nightmare since yesterday. I'm not thinking clearly.
Robin rubbed her temples like they ached. Powerful emotions could do that. Neither am I. Sarn held out a gloved hand to Robin. He didn't want to argue with her, not about this. Her quest was noble, and she deserved all the help he could give her. Besides, he had a gnawing feeling in his gut that he'd need her help to rescue his son. Especially if it comes to a fight. Sarn knew his strengths and fighting wasn't one of them. But I have other skills, and hopefully they'll make up for that lack.
How can you help me after I almost bashed your friend's head in?
Robin lifted her bow case and leaned on it like it was a walking stick. She must be strong to swing that thing around like it wasn't any heavier than a small branch, especially since it was only a few inches shorter than him. I can't break my word no matter what happens. But I'll forgive you if you promise not to tell anyone about my son. Now it was his turn to throw an ultimatum at her. He wouldn't budge unless she promised. Sarn folded his arms and hoped his glower made that clear. Robin gave him a speculative look, then waved to the mountain behind them.
The Rangers don't know about him?
Her face was hard to read with the scarf in the way. She'd pulled it up to cover the lower half of her face while he was talking to Shade. Did she do that because she was cold or to make it harder to read her expression? Sarn shook his head. Damn her shrewd mind. No, he's my secret, and I'll do anything to protect him. But would he? That resolve was new and untested. What would happen if it came down to his life or his son's? He'd only just claimed the boy in his own mind. What if that resolve failed when things got hard? More doubts assailed Sarn and picked away at him while he knelt in the snow. But he wouldn't know what he'd do until he confronted those fears head-on. And I can't do that unless we leave Mount Eredrin.
Would you really do anything?
Robin cocked a brow at the implied threat.
What would you do if I told them? I will if you don't help me. I would do anything for my daughter too, even kill for her.
Robin hefted her bow case again like she was contemplating taking another swing at them. Her question slugged him hard. What am I willing to do to save my son? Before Sarn could reply, his magic answered for him. It grabbed hold of the ground and ripped it open right under Robin. As she dropped into the crevasse, she glared at him. But she was no damsel in need of rescue. Robin slammed the metal tip of her bow case into the earthen walls of the crevasse and wedged it between two rocks, stopping her fall. She hung from it for a moment, then swung up to grab the edge. What the hell was that case made of? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Sometimes my magic gets away from me. Sarn lunged for her hand and pulled her up. He wasn't a killer, but his magic didn't have his morals. Would it have killed her? Sarn didn't want to find out. Down that road led to madness, and the sort of man he didn't want to be, so he wrapped his magic around her and boosted her up, then shut the crevasse by slamming its two halves together.
Maybe you didn't mean to do that, but it still happened.
Robin sat on the ground and gripped her bow case like she was thinking about swinging it at him again. Sarn hung his head. He deserved her distrust, but he still needed her to promise. Rand's future hinged on it. Promise me you won't speak a word about my son, and I'll do all I can to help you find your daughter and rescue her. You've already seen how powerful I am. Desperation choked him up. Would that be enough? Robin studied him for a long moment in silence, then extended her hand.
I promise.
Thank you. You won't regret it. Sarn shook her hand, and something passed between them too quick to identify, even for his magic. Robin was more than she seemed, and he hoped he'd find out what that more was. One thing perplexed Sarn, and he put the question to her. Why didn't you use your whip?
I didn't have time and I can't lose this. It was a gift from someone I love very much.
Robin leaned on her bow case as she rose.
At least now I know what you're capable of.
Robin dusted herself off as best she could. I could have killed you. Sarn rose and remembered Shade. His friend watched everything but did nothing. Sarn didn't know what to think of that.
No, you couldn't. You're not a killer. You don't need to apologize. I pushed you on purpose. I needed proof you were what you said you were.
Robin leaned her bow case against her shoulder so she could breathe into her snow-caked gloves and warm her hands. You needed proof that I have magic? Weren't my glowing eyes enough? Sarn waved to them. He couldn't turn off their glow, no matter what he did. Robin shook her head.
Out on the fringes, you see some pretty strange stuff.
She kept saying that, but she still didn't say what that strange stuff was. At any other time or place, Sarn would have jumped on that opening and interrogated her about those things. But his son was in danger, and he had a mission. Still, reining in his curiosity was harder than it should have been. How did you know I wouldn't kill you? Sarn hadn't been at all sure he could rein in his magic in time.
Your eyes betrayed you.
Robin stamped her feet.
We should go.
They should, but Sarn couldn't leave that alone. How did my eyes betray me?
You have innocent eyes. Look, I'm sorry about your friend. Can we start over?
Yeah, starting over is a good idea since we'll be traveling together for a while.
Good, then I'm Robin.
She extended her hand to Shade. I'm Shade. Shade waved but stayed out of striking range. Robin gestured to the enchanted forest waiting at the edge of the meadow.
Lead the way.
But Sarn couldn't because she'd interrupted him before he'd finished his search. He pulled up his head map anyway, more out of hope than because he expected to find any answers there. But we can't just stand here. So he took a breath and concentrated. His map was a transparent layer over the world filled with symbols and glowing lines until he turned his back on Mount Eredrin. Details vanished, leaving white spaces with no information at all. Rand's in one of those. But there were too many places where his head map had no information at all because the rangers never let him go far from Mount Eredrin, and they increased the more he zoomed out. Where are you, son? How can I find you when I barely know you?
An uneasy alliance. Do you know where to go? Robin leaned on her bow case while she waited for the mage to pick a direction, but he had a panicked look in his eyes and his breaths came in short, shallow gasps. Damn it. He didn't know. Robin scrubbed a gloved hand over her face. Great, I risked my life to challenge him and he didn't even get a direction from all that magicking. Was all that light before just a show to impress me? Robin waved at the snow that had glowed green a few minutes ago.
No, you interrupted me before I got a fix on my son. I always know where my brother is, so I should know where my son is too.
Sarn trailed off as he either forgot what they were talking about, or his magic found something. His glowing green eyes unfocused and his breathing evened out as that pinched look left his face. Maybe he found a clue. What if his son and my daughter aren't in the same place? Robin fought down the panic that question incited. No, the queen of all trees brought me here for a reason. And that reason was Sarn. It must be. He was a mage, and glowing green strings littered the ground from their altercation. But Sarn didn't even glance at them. Maybe he couldn't see the threads. Well, if he can't, then they're mine. Because she could use some magical help. Sarn had enough magic at his beck and call. Robin stooped to pick up the glowing green threads, but she stopped when she found a trail of black strings. They crawled toward the glowing green ones that Sarn left behind. When the two met, they disappeared. Why did they disappear? Did the black threads cancel out the green ones? That was possible since the black threads gave off no light. Maybe that had something to do with it? It might. Robin hurried to gather up all the green threads before the black ones could touch them. But more appeared at the mage's feet. Was he shedding them or his magic? As happened before, the green threads joined, forming a chain, and Robin looped it around her waist this time. She grabbed Sarn's cloak when he strode away without another word, but the damn thing shoved her hand away. Did you find them?
Yes. We need to go that way.
Sarn pointed into the teeth of the storm. Great. Thankfully, the snow was falling slowly, but it was steadily piling up. Lead on. Robin followed him, but so did Shade. She still didn't know what to think of them. As long as Shade stayed out of the way, Shade could come along. After all, they might need another pair of hands to rescue their children. Shade eyed her warily as they fell into step behind Sarn. His wider stride made it hard to keep up with him, even on the relatively flat meadow until he stopped at the first circle of standing stones. Did he lose his way already? Robin caught up to Sarn and stopped in front of a stone that was wider and taller than her, and it vibrated with magic. Why are you staring at the menhirs? Were they preventing him from crossing the two henges? The hairs on the back of her neck stood up and the air felt charged with power. That could be because she stood beside a mage, but these standing stones were magical too, so it could be them. Will they let us pass?
I think so.
Sarn didn't move. Robin scanned the 10 feet of snow-covered ground in between the two henges for the presence she'd encountered when she'd crossed them earlier. Invisible hands grasped her upper arms and pulled her into the space between the rings of standing stones before she could scream a warning. Fear not, an androgynous voice whispered in her ear as those hands released her. They weren't Sarn's hands. The mage still stood as if entranced by something only he could see, but he didn't step between them and menhirs. Shade remained at his side like a gray statue. Who are you? Robin spun, but the space behind her was covered in pristine snow. There weren't even any tracks. The snow had erased them. Who I am isn't important. What do you want? Robin hefted her bow case, then lowered it. She shouldn't strike entities who were more powerful than she was if she wanted to survive long enough to save her daughter. Nor did she need the creature to answer her because the answer was obvious. You don't want him to leave? Robin tilted her head to indicate Sarn so she could keep both hands on her bow case. Correct. You're another golem, right? Robin rested the bottom of her bow case on the ground. Yes. Of course you are. Why does this place have two golems? It didn't look all that special from the outside, not covered in snow, but there must be something here to warrant this much protection. Robin rolled her shoulders to loosen them up.
Who are you talking to?
Sarn waved to get her attention, but he stayed on the meadow and didn't join her in the liminal space between the two henges. Don't tell him about me. He knows something dwells between the henges, but he doesn't need to know anything more than that for now. I won't tell him if you let him pass. What was one more secret? Robin had already agreed to keep several others. He should stay under the mountain. He's safe there, surrounded by stone. That was true since magic haters ran this country, but she needed his help. He promised to help me save my daughter. That's a worthy quest. What will you do if he loses control of his magic? Out there you won't have any help. That was a frightening thought. What would she do? Robin racked her brain for an answer that would satisfy the golem, but how did one stop an out-of-control mage? I don't know. Then leave him here. He won't collapse the mountain on himself, and if he did, we can contain his magic. Can you say the same? No, but I can't leave him here. He promised to help me, and he can't break his word. Robin lifted her bow case. Although she couldn't do much with it against something she couldn't see. She's right. I promise that, but I'll come back right after that. I promise that too, Sarn said as the snow crunched behind her. Make sure he does. A wandering mage is a danger to others and himself. The golem left this liminal space, and their power did too. Glowing green strings littered the ground at her feet, and Robin collected them as Sarn passed her.
Where is the creature you were just talking to? I could only hear fragments of your conversation.
He walked partway around the space between the henges, but the golem was gone. They were a force for good, but that's all I'm sure about. Robin strode between the standing stones of the outer ring of Munhirs and stopped in front of an enchanted tree. Which way do we go? Two paths diverged from where she stood. One swung right around the massive tree in front of her, and the other went left.
To the right.
Sarn took the right turn and vanished into the forest with Shade a pace behind him. His mysterious friend remained silent. How much of that conversation had Shade overheard? I'll probably never know since I alienated them. Well, next time around she'd handle things differently. Robin trudged after them. Her legs were already leaden from all the hiking to reach here, but she'd keep up somehow. Her daughter's life depended on it. I won't fail you, Rosalie. I'll do anything to get you back. What would her companions do? Claws test them. 3 hours later. The enchanted forest was silent and dark under the cloudy sky. Not much light could penetrate the snow-laden boughs of the trees towering over them, and the going was slowed by the snow-covered roots and other trip hazards until Robin stepped in Sarn's tracks. Somehow, the mage avoided the roots and rocks littering the forest floor. Either he could see what lay under the snow, or his magic routed him around obstacles that could trip him. Whatever the case, Robin was grateful. But she kept her thoughts to herself. It felt wrong to disturb the silence blanketing them as they trekked through the snow. Robin glanced behind her, but no one followed them, not yet anyway. How long before Nolo sent some rangers after them? She could ask Sarn since he knew the rangers at Mount Eredrin, but that would remind him about the rangers. She'd seen his reaction to that when she talked to Nolo. He didn't want the rangers to follow them. No, it would be better if she kept her questions about them to herself for now. I wish I could leave a trail behind for them to follow. Robin glanced behind her at 3 sets of footprints in the snow. How long would they remain before the storm covered them with more snow? A few hours at least, since the branches above their heads were so intertwined they caught most of the snow. That would have to do then. I could leave a trail of crumbs. But that might attract hungry animals, and they might obliterate their footprints. Besides, there was no guarantee that anyone would see those crumbs either. Just leave it be. The rangers will either find our trail or not. But she bet the rangers would find it. They wouldn't let Sarn go so easily if they didn't have a way to track him. They might have someone whose sole gift is to track people like him. The old tales were littered with minor mages tracking major ones, and Sarn did nothing to conceal his power or his eyes wouldn't glow all the time. They were nature's way of warning people that someone was working magic. Shadows covered the snow on either side of them, but nothing moved in them. Still, Robin stayed on guard. Those wolves were out there somewhere stalking them. Hopefully they weren't muddying the trail. Snow crunched underfoot. It was too loud to her ears, and it broadcast their location to anyone listening, but there wasn't much they could do about that. It was impossible to walk silently when her boots kept breaking through ice patches under the snow. I hope we don't need stealth. Sarn stopped.
Someone's coming.
Who's coming? Shade rested a hand on his shoulder.
I don't know. The icon on my map keeps changing.
Sarn shook his head. What map? What are you talking about? Because Robin didn't see a map. Sarn's gloved hands were empty and they hung at his sides.
There's a map inside my head, and there are 8 icons headed for us.
Sarn waved at the area to their right. They must be the wolves that had chased her and Strella to Mount Eredrin. Otherwise, Sarn would recognize their icons. But that brought up another question. Would Sarn tell her if he sent some rangers nearby? There wasn't any point in speculating about that when she had a mage right here that she could ask. Are the rangers of Mount Eredrin following us? Nolo must have sent some rangers to follow them by now. They'd hiked for hours. If I were him, I would have, and to hell with any promises. I wouldn't let someone as powerful as Sarn out of my sight, not for all the gold in Shiari.
No. I don't sense them. The creatures coming toward us aren't anything I've ever seen before. I don't know if they're even human.
Sarn shoved his hands under his arms to warm them. What do you see on your head map thing? How could he have a map inside his head? It boggled her mind and stoked the jealous flame inside her. What I wouldn't give for a map like that. Robin slid her hands down her bow case to the topmost latch.
I see wolf icons that change to people symbols, but that doesn't make sense. Wolves can't change their shape.
Sarn shivered until Shade wrapped an arm around his lean waist. Yes, it does. A pack of skin changers chased me to Mount Eredrin. I'm not surprised they're still on my tail. Where are they now? How close are they? Robin flipped open the top latch on her bow case. Why didn't you mention that before we left? Shade grabbed her arm and turned her to face them. Let go. We need to stand back to back. They'll surround us if it's the same pack. It must be the same ones she'd faced before. Nothing else made sense. Robin twisted her arm, but she couldn't break Shade's grip. Let go.
Let's not fight with each other.
Sarn stepped away from Shade and out of their grasp. Shade bowed to Sarn. As you wish. They released Robin. We need to stand back to stand a chance. Then we can strike from any angle. But that meant trusting Shade, and Robin didn't know if she could do that after what just happened. Shade might leave her back unprotected.
No, they don't allow violence under their boughs.
Sarn waved to the enchanted trees surrounding them.
Remember their 3 rules. Start no fires. Carry no weapons. Do no harm. Those 3 rules protect countless travelers through this forest every year.
His gaze fell on her bow case and the top latch flipped closed again thanks to his magic. Robin pulled her bow case toward her and fought the urge to hug it. You can carry weapons into the forest if they're piece-tied or in a case made of wood or another natural material. They just don't like metal. And that's why her quiver held flint arrowheads. Robin had some iron ones too, but she'd wrapped them in cloth and stowed them inside her pack so the enchanted trees wouldn't sense them. She glanced up at the silent trees, towering over them to make sure they hadn't, until a gray blur moved in her peripheral vision. Watch out. Robin swung her bow case at the wolf, leaping out of the shadows.
Don't hurt them.
Sarn flung out his hand like he was casting a spell, but nothing happened. This is their territory, not ours. A green globe surrounded them, and a wolf struck it instead of Sarn. Growls disturbed the silence as 5 more wolves flanked them. We can't stay here. Robin angled her bow case so she could strike the moment the shield dropped, but it stayed in place.
We can't fight them or we'll anger the forest.
Sarn kept the shield up. He was right, but they couldn't save their kids if they stayed here. Those wolves were in the way. I hate situations like this. Robin ground her teeth as she sought another solution because they must keep going. If you drop the shield, they'll attack and we'll have to defend ourselves. Surely the forest won't hold that against us. But it might, since the forest was weird and quasi-sentient sometimes. There was also the queen of all trees to consider. She was around here somewhere too, and she might not help if they broke the rules of her forest. I don't want to anger her, not when she owes me a boon. Robin touched her pocket where the silver leaf lay.
I don't have to drop it. I can hold it for as long as we need it.
Sarn trudged on, and the shield glided over the snow to keep up with him. Robin followed when the shield bumped into the backs of her legs and propelled her forward. How long can you hold it? Because he couldn't hold the shield forever. No one was that powerful.
I don't know. It's not taxing me much yet, so I guess for a while. Besides, I like shielding, and my magic does too.
Sarn stuffed his hands into his pockets and hunched his shoulders. He said that last part so softly he might be talking to himself. Are you telling the truth about that? Robin fell into step with him and fought the urge to wrap him in wool blankets and carry him off to somewhere safe, even though he could protect himself. It was a ridiculous thought, but the urge wouldn't go away. He doesn't belong out here. He doesn't belong to you either, Robin reminded herself. Why am I even thinking about that now? I need to save my daughter. It was probably his magic putting these thoughts in her head. Mages were rare and the powerful ones were valuable. That shouldn't matter right now. He agreed to help me find Rosalie, and I agreed to return him to the Rangers of Mount Eredrin. But she already regretted that promise. Robin clenched her fists around her bow case. Thank God it was made from a tough woody vine. Wood from an enchanted tree would have been better, but no one would risk their lives or the wrath of the forest to harvest that. Robin glanced at the trees towering over them, but they stood as still and as silent as watchers in the night as the snow fell on them. Did they sense Sarn, his magic, or the shield? There was no rule against using magic in the forest, but that might be because no one was dumb enough to use it while hiking through the enchanted forest. No one except Sarn, and he didn't even glance at them. Maybe the trees didn't mind. After all, Sarn was a pacifist. I wish I knew for sure. Robin strode on when the shield bumped her again. Shady dealings. 2 hours later. Time dilated as they hiked on under the green glow of his shield, and every enchanted tree they passed looked the same while covered in snow. Sarn stared at the ground in front of him like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. He didn't glance at anything else. Perhaps nothing outside of that shield existed to him while he was magicking. Were the wolves still following them? Robin tried to scan the shadows outside the shield, but it glowed too brightly and it moved too. The shield wasn't a solid globe of green light like she'd first thought. There were particles in it, and they marched across the glowing dome like a horde of radiant ants, sometimes sunward and sometimes widdershins. When they switched directions, the shield became opaque for a moment, then faded back to a quasi-transparent state that turned everything outside it into shadows on the snow. They must still be out there. Robin adjusted her rucksack, but that didn't stop the skin between her shoulders from itching and making her feel like she'd strapped a target to her back. A shape slunk toward the shield and confirmed her guess. The wolves hadn't given up on them. They must be the same ones that chased me to Mount Eredrin. Robin couldn't see their collars, but this couldn't be a different pack. The wolf didn't attack the shield. Once was enough to prove how strong it was. The wolf just passed along beside it like a large guard dog as the night wore on. Sarn strode onward, but he kept his hands in his pockets and his thoughts to himself. Only his boots breaking the ice forming on the snow broke the silence between them. Was he always this quiet? Robin glanced at Shade, but the enigma glanced away, and she bit her tongue instead of asking them. Shade was a shadow against the green glow of the shield since none of its light dared to fall on them. How was that possible? Shade stayed close to Sarn but didn't touch him, not even when the mage stumbled over a snow-covered root. Robin caught his arm and steadied him instead. Shade had withdrawn into themselves.
I'm fine. I just didn't see that root under the snow.
Sarn slipped out of her grasp and trudged onward. A furry creature that was half wolf and half man charged the shield and bounced off, but that didn't break the stalemate. Sarn didn't even glance at the creature tumbling end over end through the snow. He hiked up the slope, and his shield glowed as brightly as when he'd cast it, but he must be tiring. There must be a way to break the deadlock without angering the forest. Robin pulled up her scarf so it covered the lower half of her face again. Sarn's shield kept the wolves from attacking, but it didn't stop the wind from buffeting them. The top of his shield flickered when snowflakes landed on it. She reviewed the forest's 3 rules, but they didn't leave any room to maneuver. Mistakes were fatal out here. But Sarn couldn't hold that shield forever. He must have a limit, even if he'd never hit it before. That was a frightening thought, though. Everyone should find their limits, especially a mage. Maybe the wolves would get bored chasing a shield they couldn't break. If they backed off, then Sarn could drop the shield. But that didn't look likely to happen soon. How much longer could Sarn hold the shield? There must be another way out of this predicament that won't exhaust Sarn's magic. Because she might need it for the rescue part of her plan. That bit lacked details right now, but she'd fill them in when they found where the wild hunt took their children. Robin fingered the glowing threads wrapped around her wrists. They were magical too. Could I use these things to chase the wolves away? She twined them into a whip somehow when she'd faced the golem in the mountain's heart, and she still had it. If I attack the wolves with my magical whip, will the trees wake from their winter slumber and attack me? They might. Their rules forbid anyone to fight under their boughs. But they didn't strike down the change wolves for attacking them, and that wasn't fair. I can't hit the wolves with my magical whip from inside this shield anyway, so it's a moot point. Robin grabbed a handful of snow from a passing branch and chucked it at the shield in frustration, and it flickered as the snow passed through it. Well, that was weird. Why does snow pass through your shield when a wolf can't? Robin tapped his shoulder when Sarn didn't reply. She needed to know how his shield worked since their lives depended on it.
My magic doesn't like water in any form.
Sarn trudged on as if in a trance. Indeed it didn't. Why didn't I notice his shield doesn't touch the snow? Its luminous edge stopped an inch above the snow-covered ground, but there wasn't enough room for anything to squeeze under it except maybe her whip. It coiled around her waist under her coat, and now she knew why. Her whip was made of Sarn's magic, and it also didn't like frozen water. Under her coat it could escape that wet stuff. Interesting. Robin ran her index finger over the glowing green threads wrapped around her wrist. They were also made of his magic, so she wasn't surprised when none disconnected and dropped into her gloved hand. Instead, the glowing threads leaned away from her wet gloves. You won't be much use in this weather. Robin suppressed a sigh. Of course, she'd gain a magical ability that was useless in the snow. That was just her luck. Robin gazed at the dark boughs overhead and prayed for patience. The queen of all trees led me to Sarn, so between his magic and my skills we'll save our children. She must believe that, or grief would overwhelm her again. I need to find someone who understands these magical threads and ask a lot of questions. Another gray blur caught her attention, and Robin scanned the forest. The snow reflected the glow of Sarn's shield and lit the surrounding area, but the trees threw deep shadows on a trail only Sarn could see. He set a relentless pace, proving he was a lot stronger than he looked. Robin glanced away when her cheeks burned from the wind. I need this right now, like a hole in my head. She shoved her attraction to that mage down, but it burned within her, undimmed by the cold logic she threw at it. He's not the first nice guy I've ever met. But he was the first mage, and it was probably his magic bending her every thought toward him. That would explain why the mages of old had so many children. Robin glared at Sarn's back. Could his magic hear thoughts? If it could, then she could give it a piece of her mind because this was ridiculous. I don't know if you can hear me, but I've already got a daughter, and I'm not in a hurry to have another one, so cut it out. We're on a mission to save my daughter. Robin stopped. What was Sarn? The owner of his magic or its host? The attraction faded to an ignorable level, but it didn't go away. It proved her point though. Robin scanned their back trail before Sarn's magic made the cloak-covered back of him attractive again and searched for that gray blur. It was probably another wolf, but she should make sure. Besides, Shade's presence guaranteed nothing would happen on this trek. I should thank them for coming. But when she turned to scan their other side, where Shade stood a moment before, the enigma was gone. Where's Shade? How did Shade leave the shield? Robin pressed on it and the green light shoved her into Sarn.
Didn't Shade come with us?
Sarn stopped when she stepped on his heels and glanced at her over his shoulder. His eyes were pools of green fire. There were no pupils, irises, or sclera, just green light that went on forever without end. Images appeared in them. What would it be like to have a mage at her beck and call? Robin squinted at the images taking shape in his eyes. Would they have turned me away? Robin couldn't remember the name of that settlement anymore, but her last interview with the captain of rangers there played out differently in her mind with Sarn there. How easy would it be to earn money if she had a mage like him? Gold coins spilled out of her hands and vanished when they hit the snow.
He'll make you a fortune. Why not take him with you when you go?
A voice said. Indeed, why not? He had so much raw power and he was so nice. Too nice. He needed someone like her to keep the wrong people away.
Yes, keep the people who can't appreciate him away. They don't understand how special he is, but you see it. You know what to do with this priceless jewel. Find him a teacher and there will be nothing he can't do,
said that voice again. The power inside him pulled her toward him. As she fell into it, she grabbed him and pulled him down with her until their lips met. He closed his eyes and pushed her away. Robin slammed into the wall of his shield and it extruded glowing hands to hold her there an arm's length away.
Why did you do that?
Sarn backed away from her and dropped his gaze to the snow under his boots, breaking her fascination.
Don't answer that. Whatever you saw isn't true. My magic puts strange ideas in people's heads.
Sarn rubbed his upper arms like he was cold. I'm sorry. You caught me off guard. Actually, his magic did because there were two voices in her head a moment ago, and only one was hers. I don't like the effect it has on me. Robin averted her gaze. A lot of old tales about mages made sense now. Their magic was seductive, even when they didn't want it to be. Sarn nodded, but he didn't look at her.
That's all right. I shouldn't have looked at you. Not while I'm using magic. I know better.
I didn't know that, but I do now, and I'll be on guard against it. Because he was as skittish as a deer, but they had larger problems right now than this stupid misunderstanding. Robin ground her bow case into the snow. Sarn must have come to the same conclusion because he changed the subject, and that cleared the air between them.
When did you last see Shade?
A few minutes ago. Could they have walked through your shield and left its protective bubble? Robin couldn't think of a reason why Shade would do that, but she didn't know them at all. Wouldn't I have seen Shade leave? If she wasn't wool-gathering and accosting her mage, yes. I need to keep my mind on my quest and my thoughts far away from Sarn and his magic. Another slip-up like this could cost my daughter's life. Robin rubbed the bridge of her nose where exhaustion sat like a ton of bricks on that spot. It must be his magic pulling all her thoughts back to him, because she wasn't like this before she'd met him and it was driving her crazy. But I can't let him out of my sight until he finds my daughter, and that won't happen as long as this stalemate continues. Robin twisted her bow case and drilled it into the snow just to do something.
No, I made it impenetrable so the wolves can't enter, and that means we can't leave it either.
Sarn hunched his shoulders and stared at the snowy ground in search of answers. Then where is Shade? Robin examined the ground too, but there were only two sets of footprints, hers and Sarn's. Maybe I imagined Shade was with us. That was possible since she was beyond tired, and exhaustion could play games with her perception. Robin rubbed her head. Her hair would be a frizzy mess after this, even with the wool hat, and she was making things worse by rubbing her head through it. Robin let her hand fall to her side, but she had nothing to offer Sarn except more questions. He seemed lost without his friend, and that didn't bode well for her daughter. He was younger than her by a few years, but that gulf felt larger than that right now. Damn it. Now I need to find Shade.
I knew it was too good to be true.
Sarn caved in on himself as he knelt in the snow. We'll find your friend. Robin spun on her heel, so she wouldn't have to watch her only hope retreat any further into himself. Why did everything rest on such a sensitive soul? Robin shook her head, then put that out of her mind. Shade said nothing since Sarn cast that shield. I swear I saw them under it, but I must have imagined it. Or had she? Robin stared at the green light emanating from Sarn as he hugged himself. Either Sarn didn't notice the snow dampening his pants, or he didn't care. But the question remained. Why would Shade evade Sarn's shield? Sarn's magic sparked and flickered as it rolled over the snow until it rose above it, leaving a thumb's width of space between them. There was a similar gap between the bottom of his shield and the snow. Robin remembered the black threads from earlier when she'd accosted Shade, and she was staring at the answer. Shade used some kind of magic to escape the shield. Why would they do that? Robin crouched and panned the Lumiere crystal hanging off a button on her red brigandine over the churned-up snow and found a black thread just like earlier, confirming her guess. Sarn wouldn't have left his friend behind, not when he had a map inside his head. He'd have noticed if Shade wasn't there because his friend's icon would have disappeared from that map, so Shade couldn't have left all that long ago and they couldn't have gone far. Where are you, Shade? And what are you doing? Robin left the black thread where it lay and rose to check their back trail. The wolves should have noticed Shade had left the shield by now and reacted unless Shade could cloak their presence from them. I wouldn't put anything past them. Shade certainly was an enigma, and she might have to solve that mystery if she wanted to save her daughter. Where were the wolves? Either they were gone, or they'd melted into the darkness beyond Sarn's shield. There was one other possibility, but she didn't want to entertain it because things were bizarre enough.
Shade. Where are you?
Sarn sagged as his magic spread out from the shield in concentric glowing green rings searching for his friend. A wolf growled nearby, and something thumped against a tree. But the shadows didn't move. What the hell was Shade doing? The surrounding trees shifted like dreamers slowly awakening. Oh no. That was the last thing they needed right now, especially with those wolves still out there. Shade, you must stop or you'll awaken the forest, and it'll attack us for breaking their rules. Robin couldn't believe she was advocating non-violence, but breaking the forest rules could be deadly, and she needed to live long enough to save her daughter.
Why did you say that?
Sarn sat up straight and his magic retreated to the shield. Because that's what's happening. Your friend escaped your shield somehow, now they're antagonizing the wolves, and that's waking the forest. Robin would love to know how Shade had managed that. What was Shade anyway? Because they were more than human. How could they fight those wolves? How had Shade disappeared earlier? Robin held her Lumiere crystal up and its light shone on a trail of black threads marking which way Shade had gone. At least we have a trail to follow. What was Shade planning? Did they just want to get the wolves off their tail, or did they have something else in mind? Until she knew, Robin would stick close to Sarn. I promised I'd return him to Mount Eredrin safe and sound after he helps me, and that's one promise I'll keep no matter what Shade does.
Shade. Answer me. It's not like you to be so quiet.
Sarn rose in one fluid motion. Either he was stronger than he looked, or his magic had lent a hand. True. You're the silence in the room, and I'm the ear straining to hear the music in your quietude.
Then come back here where it's safe.
Sarn beckoned to a shadow under an enchanted tree. Maybe his glowing eyes were keener than hers because she saw nothing in those shadows, but he did. Don't worry about them, my dear friend. They're sleeping the winter sleep too deeply to rouse on my account. Shade appeared cloaked, cowled, and veiled as if nothing had happened and sauntered toward them. No, you're wrong about that. Robin backed away from the root that bunched up out of the snow to her left and forced Sarn to move away from it too, just in case it had retribution on its mind. Robin had heard too many stories about how the forest enforced its 3 rules, but she refused to be on the receiving end of that.
Shade.
Sarn extended his hand to where Shade had been a moment before, but that enigma had disappeared again. How the hell did they do that? I'm here at your side where friends belong. Shade appeared beside Sarn and wrapped an arm around the mage's shoulders to catch him when he stumbled. You need to rest for a bit.
I'm okay now.
But Sarn leaned into his friend, proving he wasn't all right. Shade held on to him. I'm glad to hear that, but we can slow down a little. How did you do that? Robin poked Shade when they didn't answer.
Do what? I never left. I've been standing here the entire time. You just didn't see me because I am the shadow cast by a greater light.
Shade inclined their head to Sarn, but the mage didn't argue the point, even though he couldn't believe that any more than she did. I know what I saw. Robin gripped her bowcase. We'd better go before those wolves return. Shade led the way and kept hold of Sarn. There was no sign of the wolves, but that was a sound plan, so Robin followed them and Sarn's shield lit their way.
Friends by starlight. Sarn kept his shield up in case the wolves returned. He didn't trust them or their disappearance. Then there was Shade. I must have imagined it. My friend didn't disappear and then reappear. Shade doesn't have any magic. It must be exhaustion making me hallucinate. It had happened before when he'd worked a lot of magic. Sarn staggered on, and Shade stayed by his side to catch him if he tripped. Usually his magic routed him around obstacles, but it was tired too. Shade must have been there the whole time, and I just didn't see them. It's all this darkness. I hate it, and so does my magic, and it's playing tricks on me. Sarn rubbed his eyes and doubts crept in, questioning his assumptions. But he pushed all thoughts of Shade's odd behavior out of his mind and slipped out of his friend's grasp. I need their help to get my son back. That's what matters. Nothing else did. Shade came to help him because their friendship was stronger than the drugs, and that was all there was to it. But the doubts wouldn't go away. Sarn pulled up his head map and consulted it. A white star shined in a dark area that didn't grow any nearer as he hiked on, but he must be getting closer to his son. Unfortunately, the boy was in an area that had few details on his map. That must be why they weren't making much progress. His map didn't have a proper reference and couldn't show the true distance. How far away is he? I can't leave my brother alone for too long. Murren was all the family he had in the world before he found out about his son. How far would the promises he'd made to obey the Lord of the Mountain let him go? Worry about that gathered in the back of his mind and pushed out all his doubts about Shade when archer icons appeared on his map. They weren't close though. There were miles between him and the rangers from Mount Eredrin. I need to increase that. Sarn hiked faster to put more distance between them. I can't let them catch up to me. Not until he figured out how to keep his son a secret from them. Nola's voice echoed in his mind. Stay within a mile of a ranger. I can't do that. I'm sorry. Sarn stared at the green light weaving between his fingers, then banished it. He wanted to send his magic to erase their footprints in the snow, but it would refuse. Maybe the snow falling now would do the job for him, but he doubted it since most of it fell on the branches interwoven above their heads. What's wrong? Shade squeezed his shoulder, reminding Sarn he wasn't alone. It's nothing. Or not anything he could do anything about, and he didn't want to tell Robin about the rangers. Not yet, anyway. She'd want to wait for them, and Sarn couldn't do that. He'd tell her eventually, but not now. I have so much magic. There must be a way to save my son with it. I won't accept anything else. Shade wrapped an arm around his shoulders again, and his magic pushed it away. But Shade tightened their grip, and that was comforting in the cold. I think it's safe to let the shield fall if you need a break. I don't see the wolves anymore. They're still following us. Their icons flickered in and out of view on his map, but Sarn couldn't tell how far behind they were. His map didn't sketch in all the trees because that would add too many icons and make it too hard to use. Sarn left the shield in place for now. The wolves were fast. He didn't know if he could raise the shield before a wolf could attack them, and he needed to think about something else. What do you know about the people we're chasing? Sarn hoped Robin would take the conversational bait. He needed to know what she knew about his son's kidnappers to have any hope of getting the boy back. They're horn-sporting sons of a goat, Shade said because his friend hadn't racked up enough mileage on that clever turn of phrase yet.
What do you know about the Wild Hunt?
Robin asked, ignoring Shade's unhelpful outburst.
I know you ran into them before. You should tell us what you know about them.
Damn it. That was the question Sarn wanted to avoid. He still didn't believe it was them, despite what Shade had said. That was a couple of years ago, and my memory of the incident is hazy. I wasn't well when I encountered them. And his memories of that period in time between the cave-in and Lord Jorinth finding him and his brother in a snowstorm were blurry. Some of that was shock and grief for those he hadn't been able to save, and the rest was blurred by the promise he'd made to Lord Jorinth to serve in whatever capacity the Lord of the Mountain deemed appropriate in exchange for schooling for his brother. That promise was sharp and clear in his mind, as was pretty much everything else that had happened in the 18 months since then, but the time before wasn't. Nor was that the last time he'd encountered the Wild Hunt. He'd met them again yesterday too, but Sarn bit his lip to keep from talking about that strange incident and the power the Huntress held over him. I don't want Robin to know about that. At least not until he could break it somehow.
Then maybe you'd better tell me what you know about them.
Robin stabbed the ground with her bow case. Was that a threat? Sarn didn't know how to read her yet. I just have impressions, really. I wasn't with them for long, and I'm pretty sure I had a fever then. Because some of his recollections made no sense. The Wild Hunt couldn't possibly gallop across the sky. I must have imagined that.
Tell me anyway. Maybe it'll help.
Sarn doubted that would, as he glanced up at the trees towering ominously over them for answers. Their crowns must brush the cloudy sky when the wind whipped through them. They hit all but one star that sailed across the sky.
Sarn?
Robin extended her hand, but she stopped before she touched his shoulder and her arm fell back to her side.
Are you all right?
Now Robin looked at him with concerned eyes. Why do you ask? Sarn stamped his cold feet.
Because you've been standing there, staring at the sky for a while now. We should keep going.
Robin didn't say if you can, but her tone implied it, and her unasked question hung between them until a whisper threaded through the snow-laden branches.
Sleep the winter sleep, it seemed to say. Sleep it deeply and dream of spring's coming. Sink into winter sleep till spring sends winter keening. Sleep deep beneath the snow.
Another voice joined the first. Don't wrestle with ice or frozen ivy. Let all sleep deeply in winter's peace and dream of spring buds breaking open. Dream of green things rising.
But for now let all sleep deep in winter's peace. Sleep the winter sleep. Sleep deeply and dream of spring's coming.
The rhythm was so compelling, Sarn nodded along with it. Do you think they're aware of us? Sarn couldn't help it. He glanced from tree to tree. He felt like a trespasser on their territory, but the forest wasn't awake yet. Nor did he know how to ask for permission to cross its domain.
I don't know. The forest is strange in winter.
Robin glanced everywhere except at him. That made sense because the forest felt like it was as sound asleep as the earth cradling its roots, and his magic wanted to sleep too. Sarn stifled another yawn, but it was no good. Weariness wore on him. Are they watching us? Shade turned in a slow circle as they looked up at the trees. If it wasn't winter, then yes, they'd watch us, but I just don't know. They might be asleep this deep in winter. My magic isn't interested in growing things, so I can't check. Sarn relaxed enough to stretch his arms over his head, but that didn't help. Oh fate, he was so tired. Start no fires. Carry no weapons. Do no harm. Or else. Those are the rules of the enchanted forest, he said because it bore repeating. Shade stood a little way off, about as far as the shield would allow, and watched them with unreadable eyes. Then let's not tempt them.
Now that we've agreed we won't be pissing off the forest, can we please get a move on? We've been standing here for too long and I'm freezing.
Robin rubbed her arms through her coat. Off to her right, Shade moved so fast his friend blurred. Another yawn caught Sarn unawares before he could stifle it or call out a warning. But he needn't have worried. Robin must have seen the attack coming because she neatly sidestepped Shade and fell into a defensive stance. With her knees bent to lower her center of gravity and her fists raised, she was ready for anything Shade could throw at her.
Come at me again and you'll regret it.
Stop, please, just stop. You said it yourself. They're watching. Please don't anger them. They'll hurt us all if you do. Sarn yawned again, longer than before. Why can't I stop yawning? And why was Shade deliberately provoking Robin? It was so out of character for his friend. Because you need rest. Shade crossed to him, but the crunch of snow faded as that whispered chant started up again. Sleep the winter sleep. Sleep it deeply until spring's coming. Sarn yawned so hard his jaw made a cracking sound. He rubbed his eyes, but it was no good. That damn song was calling sleep to him. His shield flickered when he yawned again.
Are you sure you're all right?
Robin also approached, and her eyes were concerned, but she gave Shade a wide berth. No, but I'll go on anyway. I have to. Sarn admitted because he couldn't lie. I think this happened before. But he got no further than that because the peace that lay over this valley pushed away all his cares. Giant trees sheltered them from the worst of the wind and weather. Snow blanketed it thickly, but that pristine white stuff looked cloud-soft and so comfy the longer Sarn stared at it. Its cold, wet touch sapped his energy when he sank into it.
Sleep the winter sleep.
Yes, he needed to sleep. The rescue mission could wait for a few hours. Sarn yawned again.
Sarn.
Robin shouted, then Shade was there. Gloved hands caught him under his arms and lifted him, but their touch was wrong. You're so cold. Sarn escaped his friend's hold and staggered away. It's me, your loyal Shade. I'm always here for you. The swish of robes meant Shade had bowed. His friend enjoyed an occasional bout of theatrics. Sarn winced as those words, I'm always here for you, drove a knife through his chest. For a moment he was back there in that cave with that psychotic man bearing down on him. He felt Murn's arms around his waist, squeezing so hard he feared he would shatter from the strain. He'd wanted so badly to pick up his brother and run so far away that no one would ever find them. But he'd sworn to obey the orphan master. Even now, less than 2 years later, he could still feel the bonds that promise had woven. They'd held him immobile, as Hadroval had beaten him almost to death. A tear traced the scar running down the left side of his face. It was a gift from that madman and a reminder that magic corrupts. Shade hadn't been there to back him up then, but his friend was here now. Did that cancel out the other time? I can stand on my own, Sarn said around a lump in his throat as he slipped out of Shade's grip and almost face-planted into the snow. You can't go on like this. You were on watch tonight. Sarn, you must rest. Magic takes a lot out of you. Shade stepped closer. Sarn backed away, putting space between them. He didn't want anyone to touch him right now. There was a time when he hadn't needed that space, but that was before Hadroval had tried to kill him. Nor was he the only one who kept their distance. Robin had also stopped, and she rested one hand on the arrow sticking out of her rucksack. Her gloved fingers grazed the fletching, and she looked ready to draw it at the slightest provocation. That was comforting because it was so like Ranispara and the other rangers he'd spent the last 18 months getting to know. She also waited for a response. Sarn tried to catch her eyes, but she kept them averted. Did Robin know what he could do? They're flint arrowheads, aren't they? Sarn rose from the snow. His question had caught her off guard.
Yes, that's standard issue for a ranger.
Robin let her hand fall back to her bow case. Sarn? Shade reached for him. But Sarn sidestepped his friend. I must go on. Sarn caught Robin's eyes for a fraction of a second, and she nodded. Her acceptance galvanized him, and he set off again, tramping through the snow toward the light on his map that he hoped marked his son. Robin reminded him of the Rangers he knew, but she was unlike them in one very important regard. She didn't see him as mentally defective or treat him like a child. No, so far she'd treated him like an equal. Maybe her age had something to do with it. She couldn't have more than a few years on him. With her help he could prove to the Rangers that he could be trusted. Various schemes, all of them innocent, chased themselves through his mind until his knees buckled. Weakness washed over Sarn in waves, putting the lie to his bold words, and magic ran from him in shining green streams. Sarn blinked as those rays vanished. Maybe he'd imagined them, and the gray spots dancing in his vision. He blinked again and swayed. The world tilted and spun as the snow rose to meet him. Please don't let me black out in front of Robin. Sarn didn't know who he was begging for that boon. You should stop, Shade hissed in an undertone as a pair of gloved hands caught Sarn again. No, not until I get my son back. Don't touch me. Sarn twisted in his friend's too-hot grip. He fell into the snow and kicked up a sparkling wave of it. Sarn hadn't known that boy was coming until Shade had shown up to warn him about the child, but that was all in the past now. The sky had traded places with the ground, and Sarn stared up at Robin.
Sarn, what's wrong with you? Are you sick?
Robin shook him, and a lock of her dark hair swung down out of her hood into her face. She hooked it behind her ear. Freckles dotted her nose and shadows lay under her eyes. Robin looked as tired as he felt, but she didn't complain. She'd traveled more than she'd said, and Sarn wondered what had driven her into the wild. An urge to roam?
Are you all right?
Robin shook him because he still hadn't answered her. Sarn swallowed the apology building in his throat. He was sorry he wasn't stronger and better trained. But there was still a lot he could do despite that, so it was time to get up and stop wallowing in self-pity, since that wouldn't save his son or her daughter. Help me stand. I can go a little further. Robin clasped his forearm and pulled him up. Did her eyes have green lights in them? Or had he imagined that? She kept her gaze firmly fixed on the patch of snow in front of her so he couldn't tell. If Robin could go on, then so could he. He just needed to put one foot in front of the other forever, if that's what it took. Sarn adjusted his pack even though he didn't need to. His magic would ensure it stayed on his back and out of his way, no matter what he did. Shade's eyes bored into his back, but Sarn didn't glance at his friend because Shade knew him too well. Robin intrigued him in a way no one ever had. Damn her. She was a puzzle, and he was curious about the pieces. But he trudged on through the snow because he could find out more about her later when there wasn't a voice whispering in the back of his mind, urging him to sleep the winter sleep. I must get away from that voice before it lulls me to sleep. Sarn rubbed his eyes when they closed. That voice had quieted his magic, making it just as sluggish as he felt. Sarn tried to shake off that weariness. But it wouldn't go, not even when he filled his mind with images of his defenseless son, and the old fear returned. What if I hurt him? I don't want to, but I'm so big and he's so little. Rand glowered at him in memory like the baby knew what he was thinking and disagreed with it, until Sarn blinked away the images. Why did they take him? He asked because he needed an answer. It was such a senseless act and not done by accident or happenstance. How had the creature known where his son was? It just made no sense.
I've been wondering the same thing about my daughter.
Robin stopped and leaned on her bowcase.
Why did they take her? Why that night?
Shade gave her a look, as if the answer to her last question should be obvious. For some reason his best friend didn't like Robin at all. Sarn didn't ask why. There were some things he didn't need to know. Besides, he needed Robin. The lullaby rolled back around to the beginning again, and Sarn yawned. His feet were cold, but he pushed on up the snowy slope, weaving between trees. Keep going. Your son needs you. Don't let a stupid song you can't get out of your head stop you. But it was so persuasive, and the thought of curling up in the snow and sleeping until dawn purpled the sky sounded like heaven right then. Sarn had lost track of time in the forest, but it must be close to midnight now. Sleep deeply and dream of spring's coming. Sink into winter sleep till spring sends winter keening. Sleep deep beneath the snow. Don't wrestle with ice or frozen ivy. Let all sleep deeply in winter's peace and dream of spring buds breaking open. Dream of green things rising. But for now let all sleep deep in winter's peace. Sleep the winter sleep. Sleep deeply and dream of spring's coming, sang that insistent voice that no one except him heard as the winter wonderland spun around him. The wind blew snow into his eyes when Sarn collapsed again. Warmth blanketed him as he lay on his side between two enchanted trees. Pins and needles stabbed his extremities. I'll just lie here for a moment while I get my bearings. Sarn summoned his magic, but it flowed sluggishly into his hands and sat there, unwilling to touch the snow, and frustration burned away his weariness. I need you to make sure we're still on track. Sarn shook his hand, but his magic stayed inside his glove and clung to his skin. The ground under him trembled, but that wasn't his doing. Sarn brushed off the hand that tried to grab his shoulder. Did you feel that?
Feel what? Are you all right?
Robin crouched beside him. There it is again. Sarn ran his gloved hand over the ground, and his magic uncurled like a curious cat and extended beyond his glove. There's something under here. Sarn pushed the snow aside, but there was just more snow under it, and his magic curved away from it. What are you doing? Shade crouched on his other side. Don't you feel it? Sarn dug through the snow, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Feel what? What do you sense? Shade touched his shoulder. Sarn pushed up to his hands and knees and knelt there so he could dig deeper. There's magic under here. Of course there is. We're in the enchanted forest. Shade rested a hand on his and stopped him. I know. Sarn stopped and stared at the snow between him and the ground. Was he just sensing the forest's magic? A moment ago he'd have sworn it was stone magic he sensed, not tree magic, but now he wasn't sure. Tree magic was related to stone magic in ways he didn't understand. Maybe that's what I sensed, the similarities between their magic and mine. Sarn gestured to the trees, then rose when Robin and Shade pulled him up.
Come on. We better get moving before you freeze.
Robin released him and grabbed her bow case from where it leaned against a tree. Sarn stamped his feet, then froze when the ground shuddered again. His feet tingled inside his boots the way they did when powerful magic passed beneath them.
Did you do that?
Robin let go of the branch she'd grabbed when the ground had moved. No, that wasn't me. Sarn dropped to his knees and dug through the snow. This time, his magic helped him scoop aside the 2 feet of snow in between him and the frozen ground, revealing a glowing green line as wide as his body through the earth under the snow.
What is that?
Robin stepped away from it. It's magic like mine. Sarn let his hand hover over it. Should I touch it? He wanted to more than anything right now. The glowing green line called to him, but he hesitated. What if it traps me?
I can see that. But what's it doing?
Robin waved to the green light shooting into the distance as she hiked down the hill, following it. Perhaps she could see it too.
Does this have anything to do with the wild hunt?
Sarn shrugged, but he wondered about that too. It could. They are magical. But he was magical too. I could find out. His magic yearned to touch that beam. It took all his concentration to keep it inside his hand and away from that green light. It was the same color as his magic. Don't touch it. We don't know what it is or what it'll do to you if you do. Shade crouched next to him and reached for his hand. But Sarn had enough coddling. He slammed his hand down on the green light shooting through the earth. I choose the risks I take, not you, and I need to know what this is. Sarn closed his fist around the green beam, and images blossomed in his mind. 13 Lumiere crystals, his magic whispered as his map spawned inside his head and plotted them. They're in the light. Sarn couldn't see the wild hunt, but his map now bore their images, and they galloped away from them. They're getting away.
How is that possible?
Robin rushed back to him, and the snow crunched under her boots. I don't know, but they won't get away. I won't let them. Sarn grasped the beam with his other hand, and the images vanished. What is this beam doing? Who generated it? Sarn had so many questions that had no answers. Should you do that? Shade rested a hand on his shoulder, but Sarn used his magic to shove it away.
How do you know they're in the light? How is that possible?
Robin knelt to get a better look at the beam. She sounded skeptical, and Sarn didn't blame her. She didn't have his map, and it was never wrong. I see them, and I know how that sounds. But you have your craft, and this is mine. Trust me. I know what I'm doing. Sarn let go of the beam. It wouldn't tell him its secrets, and he didn't have time to waste interrogating it.
How can you see them?
Robin rested her bow case against her shoulder. Through my magic. But that was an understatement. The crystals in their possession called to him. Sarn reached for them. They can't escape me.
I still don't understand how that's possible.
Robin shook her head. But he ignored her comment. How could she understand? Power wasn't surging through her veins, waiting for her to shape it, but he didn't know what shape to give it to get what he wanted. It's magic, Shade said, the word magic, as if that explained everything, but it was more complicated than that. The words tumbled out to correct that misapprehension before Sarn could stop them. There's magic inside each Lumiere crystal they're carrying, and they call to me. Come to me. Sarn let go, and his magic dove into the green beam, seeking the Lumiere crystals he could sense but not see. His map flickered, then reformed, and red arrows appeared on it. They pointed at deer symbols that changed to human shapes. The wild hunt, he said without meaning to. Where were they? Their icons were right on top of him, but there was only snow and rocks and enchanted trees surrounding them, and the wolves were there too. They bayed like they smelled them. Why can't I see them? Did they have a spell of invisibility? Sarn reformed the shield, and it surrounded them in case they did. He'd keep it in place until he figured out what was going on. He sent more magic out, and it rolled over the snow in search of them. I'll blanket the area in magic if I must. I will find them. He just didn't know what he would do after that. But Robin could decide that. He was the mage, and his job was to find them.
What are you doing?
Robin tapped his shoulder. Searching for the wild hunt. They're right here. I can sense them but I can't see them. And the frustration was burning him up and making his face hot. Why can't I find them? Finding is my strongest skill. But his magic couldn't find them either. The arrows spun around on his map, and the power he'd just sent to search ran around them in glowing circles until he retracted it. Where are they? Sarn punched the snow. Why can't I figure this out? Because no one had ever taught him how to use the magic inside him. Sarn had learned by trial and a lot of error. I won't give up. He closed his eyes to block out the winter forest and the judgment in Robin's dark eyes. I can find them. Shade squeezed his shoulder. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place. I'm not. They're here. Sarn felt it in his bones. He grabbed for that strange beam again and pulled all his magic into himself except the part maintaining the shield surrounding them. He banished his head map so he could concentrate on that beam. It was just frustrating him anyway. Symbols shined in the beam as they flowed away from him, but he couldn't read them. Could the wild hunt be inside the beam somehow? I'll crack it open if I must, but I will find them. Sarn shoved his magic into the beam until it exploded in a shower of green sparks that bounced harmlessly off his shield.